You see, he caught me again. Here I was having my nice morning doze, and he bursts in, demanding time on the air. I've got important things to say, he says, as if I haven't got important things to say. But strangely enough, we're saying both the same thing this morning, and that is this question of Coots and NatWest. Because, strangely enough, the people who aren't particularly well liked often say things, and then we dislike them even more because we don't like hearing what they say. But Elon Musk said, "Don't worry about artificial intelligence because computers have already taken over." And I agree, and that applies to the banks particularly. The other man who said something that was very sensible, and that was Boris Johnson, who said, "Our present system of government is not fit for purpose. We don't like him very much anymore. At least the establishment doesn't." I personally am beginning to like both of them. I love people who are prophets without honor in their own country, because I fit into that category. He, on the other hand, doesn't fit in there. He's full of common sense. I suppose that's why I quite like having him on. It's nice to have a touch of common sense on this program in the morning instead of me.
A terrible socialist, I'm afraid to say. Yeah.
But, right. Okay. But do you want to talk about the banking situation again this morning?
Dame Alison Rose. Yes, exactly. I am just amazed that she found herself in a position where she was at a dinner and was talking to a journalist and gave that information out. Now, you know, you're a journo. That's been your profession for many years. How do you tweak something like that out of somebody who's been a professional? As I understand it, she had been at NatWest all her working life. It's okay. There's a little bit of drink probably involved, but how else do you do it, Keith? Tell us about your techniques, your doorstepping techniques.
Well, it depends really, because there was an article written some years ago about investigative journalists, particularly when Harold Evans was in charge of the Sunday Times, and investigative journalism was at its height.
Yes.
It really was an art form, and there were some really good people involved in it.
And when you say investigative journalism, obviously that often is a slow burn, isn't it?
Oh yes, very much so.
And so there needs to be a lot of money invested into it.
That's right.
And you might not necessarily have an end, but you do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, but also I think you were asking how you get the information out to people, and you have to be of a peculiar character, because you're quite right. Investigative journalists disappear for weeks on end. Yeah. Even their family don't dare say anything in front of them in case it's used. I mean, it is that sort of mentality.
Yep.
On the other hand, one of the techniques I learned at Dow Jones. Now, I never actually worked for Dow Jones. I only consulted with them while I was with CNBC. But Dow Jones had something called an enterprise story.
Right.
And what they would do is they would take just the tiniest scrap of information, and their nose would say, "Hang on, there's something not quite right here," and they would spend some time building the case until, in the end, they, full of confidence, they were able to say, "Hey, this is the situation."
Yep.
I suspect, I don't know who she spoke to.
A chap from the BBC.
Well, yes,
she sat next to him at,
that's right. But I imagine that if he was at that level of the dinner, he's one of the administrators. He probably said to somebody, "Hey, listen, Alison Rose said this to me last night. I think you better start to look into it." Yeah. And if it was actually a good enterprise journalist, then he would have been on the case, and that's how it would have come out. But the fact of the matter is you should treat us all with suspicion.
Oh, yes, I do.
Not least of which is, I say to people, for God's sake, do not say anything to me that you don't want repeated. It's not that I may well say, or don't say no comment. It's not that I won't honor it. It's that I forget. No, in a day or two, I've forgotten where I've heard that, and I use it. And I don't mean to break the confidence. So you don't tell me any secrets.
No.
Right.
I have a deep skepticism about ever talking to journalists. I have to say, simply for that reason, that you never quite know how you're going to be quoted, or dare I say it, in some cases, misquoted.
I mean that's easy too.
Yeah.
But quite often people will say something and then they realise that they shouldn't have said it, and by the time they finish the explanation, is you don't really know what you heard. It's a two-way street, Richard.
Let me ask you this, Keith, because one of the things that I occasionally do is if I have to talk to one of your number, and obviously I take a vaccine before I do so in case I catch anything from journalists. If somebody says, right, this is off the record, how much is that honoured by the journalists?
Probably for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, you forget that you said to somebody that you heard something off the record. It's not that you deliberately. I mean, generally speaking, I think that journalists are fairly honourable as a profession and as people. There's the odd rogue, of course, but then, as in the papers this morning, there's the odd rogue in your profession too.
Oh yeah.
Causing a bit of a storm.
And they get caught. That's the thing, isn't it? They do. You can't maintain that. That level of dishonesty.
But I would prefer somebody not to say to me off the record.
No, I understand.
If you don't want it repeated, keep quiet. Bottle it up.
Yeah, no, I can quite understand that.
There are two differences that actually people in the profession don't understand. One is the difference between a press conference and a press briefing. And press briefings aren't used anywhere near enough. In other words, you invite a journalist or journalists for a meal or whatever, and a look around the factory or a look around the office or a chat. And not because you've got a news item at the time, but what you want when news items come up, you want them to be able to put it into perspective and to do a solid reporting job. Now, strangely enough, my introduction to mobile phones was like that. At Harland and Wolff in the 1980s, they had a very forward-looking MD, because Harland and Wolff went into IT after they stopped building ships.
Right, yeah.
And in those days, a computer filled a room. And he said, I want you to be aware of where this industry is going. He said, in 10 years' time, all of you will be walking around with a mainframe computer in your pocket. What the hell are you talking about? That big thing out there? Who's talking about a mobile phone?
Yep.
So that's sort of useful stuff.
Yes, and no doubt also that they plied you with their hospitality at the same time.
Well, it's a very nice situation.
Yeah.
I have to say that we used to go, when I was working at Reuters, we used to go to Daiwa Europe in the city.
Yeah.
And it's changed now. But the Japanese, you would go into a room and there was enough drink there to make any cocktail that you wanted. You could name it. And then you would go in and you would have lunch and there was a butler for each guest.
I'm just thinking about my career, Keith, and why I've really not benefited from this. And I think the nearest I've come to that is that I represented Cadbury's, who owned another company, and they had a factory in Chesterfield where a woman had lost her finger in the sherbet dib-dab machine.
All right, yeah.
So it was all health and safety, go along and do that. And so they said, well, will you come up before the hearing in front of the magistrates at a separate time? Just come to the factory and talk to us and we'll show you what we think's happened. Fine. And you get out at Chesterfield Station and you can just smell sort of hot toffee because it permeates the air there. It's the main employer in the town. And at the time, my children were quite young. And I came away with a great sack of sweets. So they were very pleased. And then when I went back there to do so I did. There was no alcohol involved, sadly. when I went back there to do the actual hearing and say, sorry, you know, the woman's still employed, she's being compensated. Magistrates were you know, absolutely fine about it because they were the main employer in the town, and what they weren't going to do was anything that would prejudice that remaining in the position. But you know, I don't get hospitality unless anybody, you know, if there's somebody out there who wants to buy me a drink in the front bar of the Black Horse, then they're welcome to do
so. I've noted that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if I could just say to you, though, you can put this in your professional diary. There's a big difference between press conferences in the United States and press conferences here.
Right.
If they offer alcohol in the United States, no journalist will go because it's considered a bribe. If you actually don't offer alcohol here, nobody will go.
No,
that's right, because we're drinking is a key part of journalism. And Colin Marshall, a Lord Marshall now,
yes,
who came back from the United States to take over British Airways, did the first annual report, and they held it in the brewery. Is it Whitbread's, the Barbican, which is now turned? Yes. Yeah. And he said, we won't have any drink at all. And they said, sir, can you see the headlines tomorrow morning? British Airways couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery.
That's very good. That's very good. I several years ago, I represented the prosecution in a case where there was a little punch up on Hastings seafront. But unfortunately, it was between local youths and language students. And this language student, who was the nephew of the senior whatever head of Qatar, the country, punched down, banged his head, and died. So we had loads of people from Qatar come over, all men, I may say. Even his mother wasn't allowed to come. But as a consequence of doing that case, and the lad was convicted, I got invited to the Qatari National Day along with the officers in the case. And it was at Claridge's. Wonderful event. I may have told you this, Keith.
No, you haven't. It's a new story.
And it's long ago, you know, David Frost was there. Lots of other journos were there, in fact. And the most fantastic food, just sort of buffet. You know, there was a great wall of fruit. There was a seafood bar, sushi, you know, whatever you wanted. But I was there with two coppers. And the one thing they didn't have was alcohol. And so I was happy to stay there, but these two were getting a bit twitchy. And we ended up having to leave early so I could take them around the corner for a pint, because, you know, a day out in London without that wasn't a proper day out as far as they were concerned. Yeah.
Now, you wanted to talk about Alison Rose.
Yeah, I do. I'm perplexed as to how somebody in her position, with her experience, could have been so naive, frankly, so as to say something at all about a client in the way that she did. You know, I know the rules of my profession, and you know the rules of yours. I know lots of things about lots of people, but I'm not going to tell you them, and I don't even tell my dog them. But it was a terrible failing, I feel.
Yeah. Shall I tell you what my theory is? And it's a way out theory, and it's not really, because I actually am very lucky. I've traveled the world. I've dealt with all sorts of people. When I was a student, I deliberately took jobs helping to build the Trans-Canada Highway, being a milkman, being a junior prison guard, and so on and so forth. In other words, I think I know a bit about what life is about.
Yeah.
You are the same. I know that you actually did all sorts of things so that you got to know what people are about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
These people at the top never went through that, and they live in a bubble in Westminster, and they don't see things the way that we do. And that gives rise to a certain arrogance where they really think that they know everything and turn out to know nothing. Now, that's sweeping, but nonetheless.
Yeah, that is sweeping, and I don't know about her personal circumstances other than the fact that she worked for NatWest, as I understand it, effectively all her professional
And in my
life.
book, that's a strike against her straight away.
Yeah, okay, all right, okay. But for example, Keith, I occasionally, if I have a case that involves, for example, covert surveillance, or something of that kind. So, or there's an informant. So there's some very sensitive material. I will have a meeting, and I've got some of these in my head at the moment. I will have a meeting with somebody who will brief me on that. And I'm not even allowed to take a note of that. I'm not allowed to write it down in case anybody ever sees what I'm writing.
Right.
Now, why it is that a bank manager feels able to share that, my overdraft is my business as far as I can see, and I'll take it elsewhere if you're going to do that. But it's a remarkable lack of judgment on their part.
But this is a world where you actually get civil servants who leave secret papers in a briefcase on a bus.
Yep.
It's not the same attitude towards privacy and confidentiality that you in your profession undertake, and to some extent me in mine. I mean, yes, I might, well, God bless her, I don't have her anymore, but I would go home to my wife and I may divulge a confidence to her that I've learned in a day, but it would be no more than to her.
Yep.
So what I know about some people and so on is nobody's business, and I'm sure it's the same as you. We understand confidentiality.
Absolutely.
A lot of people in the Westminster level, if I can put it that way, simply don't. They just assume things.
Yeah. No, I think there's something in that. For my profession now, if I were to do as you say, leave the briefcase on the bus with information about a client of mine, or something equivalent, the levels of fines that are now imposed are just awful. It's a sort of minimum of £10,000.
Wow.
Yeah. That you may end up having to pay if you. So we're all we're all very sensitive about it for understandable reasons.
Yeah.
And also you need to be able to reassure people, look, I know your information. I know intimate details about your life, and I'm not going to share them with others. But so there's this lapse here on the part of somebody who's on a much higher pay grade than I am, or you are, Keith. I know I get about $250,000 a month for doing this program, and that's good of you.
Well, that's just petty cash to us.
Just yeah. But what was she thinking about?
Yeah.
It's and you're quite right. It says something about maybe the state of the nation that people can even contemplate that.
Well, in my chat to Philip yesterday, we were talking about broadcasters. He asked about some of them, I said to him that in the broadcast profession, it is not the cream that rises to the top. It's got itself into such a mess that actually the people who are so-called stars are so poorly trained and really have such poor skills, but everybody says how wonderful they are. and indeed they're not. And so mistakes are made and all sorts of things. If we make a basic assumption that Alison rose to the top, is it because she is skillful, or is it because of the system that is used in banking terms to go up the ladder?
Welcome to the Bitter Old Men podcast, where two old men sit around and explain why they've been failures.
Now, you see, I don't consider myself a failure, and I don't consider you a failure, and I don't consider Phil a failure. Is that the thing is, to some extent, we are slightly old-fashioned in our views. But my argument for that would be, yes, we need innovation. Yes, we need youth. But what we've done is we've started to worship it. So the young can do no wrong and the old can do no right. Now, there's got to be a mix.
Yes, no, I agree with you entirely about that. That there has to be a mix, no question. Let me just tell you a slightly funny story for what it's worth. I'm in the middle of a trial at the moment, and my opponent, who I've never met before, she said to me, "I've been told about you." I said, "Right." She said, "I'm told that you're a bit of a Rottweiler and I shouldn't rattle your cage." And I went home and I told my family this, and they said, "Dad, you're too small to be a Rottweiler. You're a Chihuahua. You bite their ankles." So, there's no chance of ever, being praised for anything you do in the Barton household, and a jolly good thing too.
Yeah. But actually, it is true, isn't it? The old saying would be, in any given situation, is watch the quiet one.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yes.
Nice guy on the surface, but
yeah, don't cross him. Yeah. But I do wonder whether there's something more than simply this one person making a mistake, misspeaking, whether in drink or for other reasons. I'll be honest with you, I've got no time for Farage whatsoever. I know you might. Pretty misserved in this case. I do wonder whether it's as you say, it's a wider problem that needs to be looked at. About the way people behave in the professions, and I
think politics has seeped into absolutely everything that we do, and that's wrong.
Yes,
I mean, I argue, and if you like, the position of this television station is that there should not be political parties in local politics. It's the very best people that to serve this community have been the independents.
Oh, there's no question about that.
And I'm told because I wasn't there, so I'm being very careful. But I'm told that when the Greens won and they had the mayor making, as they call it, is they immediately politicized the occasion, which is just a ceremonial thing, to the point where some people of experience of politics were embarrassed and walked out. That is wrong.
Yes.
That is not serving the community. That is serving the party. And I think that probably at the level that we're talking about with this lady and with Starmer and so on and so forth, is that they can't wait to politicize some of these things. And that's, oh gosh, oh, look at this. This is juicy. Not is it serving anybody's interests. It's juicy, right? That'll make the party look good. Well, I don't give a damn about the party or the parties.
No.
They are all as bad as one another, actually. Nobody's going to make me dictator, so I back off.
I do think that, and I don't draw a distinction between us, Keith, but I think my generation, I'm 56, my generation have let the country down because the people who could have made a difference and could have, as you say, been measured and deal with things properly, have been put off politics simply because of that awful scrutiny that goes on, the party process, backbiting, and it's a terrible shame that we don't have that sense, which I think we did have previously in this country, of some idea of sort of compromise, of being able to deal across the floor of the house.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And it's simply gone, hasn't it?
Yes. I mean, I think that for all our faults, and let's face it, my generation and possibly your generation have had plenty of faults, but we believed in the country.
Yep.
As opposed to believing in a political party, or more and more and more, is it called a man, me, and that has changed things.
Yes.
And I mean, the sort of stupidity that we've got to, out of 650 people, MPs in the House of Commons, I start each day saying I wouldn't give you tuppence for one of them. But you see, some of them are there because they're black. Some of them are there because they're gay. Some of them are there because they're women. Some of them are there because they're other minorities. Now, that should not be the reason that they're there. I'm not unsympathetic to the problems of black people or gay people or women or whatever. But they shouldn't be picked as our leaders on that basis. They should be picked on the basis of, can they do a good job? And there are more people who have stood as candidates for all parties who haven't been selected because they wanted a ratio. We've got to have a woman and we've got to have a black or whatever. And it's nonsense. Rubbish.
Keith,
you're going to argue with me now.
Keith, well, firstly, I'm just going to say this. I disassociate myself from everything that you have just said. And probably best I leave it there.
Now, let me be quite clear. I do not mind if 650 people are black, or 650 people are gay, or 650 people are women, if they are the best available.
Yeah,
that's the point I'm making.
No, it's a debate to be had.
But good. Can we have it one day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
we can.
These early morning debates are becoming very popular, I must say.
No. We can have that, and I will be firmly. I'm not in favour of what they had in America for many years, sort of positive discrimination. I think that creates its own difficulties down the line, in particular for the people who are promoted through it, because sometimes they aren't quite up to the job. But that's one thing. The other thing is that there is a lot of inherent racism, sexism, anti-gay thought. And some of that's conscious and some of it is unconscious. And I think we need to be very careful about making sure that doesn't inform us about decisions we make.
Yes. I mean, I make no bones about it. I come from whatsoever. None. I can't remember, even as a child.
Ageism?
Ageism to some extent. But by the same token, I've had 2 or 3 19-year-olds work in this operation.
Sorry, in this operation. Sorry.
So yes, to some extent, I am ageist, but not a great deal. Somebody walks through that door and says, "I'd like to be involved in this," I don't ask what they are. So what I want to know is, A, can they stand the pace?
Yeah.
Because as you and Phil have discovered, it's not as easy as it looks. The pace is pretty fierce for this. And what you don't want is somebody who's going to think how wonderful it is for 5 minutes and then back off. But secondly, is their heart in it? And if their heart is in it, they can come in without any experience whatsoever. And in fact, I've had some pretty good track records of turning people out who turn out to be really first-class people. I mean, one is perhaps not the finest example, But I mean, I took Gloria Hunniford when she was about to be turfed out of the newsroom in Northern Ireland.
When you
and,
said
she's
you,
quite
you,
successful.
you took Gloria Hunniford, can you just clarify what you mean by that?
Well, it's okay, Flo. I'm not going to reveal any secrets. My lips are sealed. But broadly, I mean, not to bore you with the detail, but I was sent to Northern Ireland by the BBC, and they discovered they'd given everybody the summer off, and nobody left. I was only supposed to be there for 2 months. Only left with me. And they said, could I hope together a summer program to fill this thing, which would be going out on Radio 4? And I said, well, I've listened carefully to people who, in my terms, are good broadcasters. And I said, that girl over there, that blonde over there, she's good. If I can have her as the presenter, then I'll stay. And they went into a huddle, and she'd been doing some freelance work for the newsroom. And she wasn't a very good journalist. She was a good broadcaster. She wasn't a very good journalist. And they were about to turf her out. So it saved her bacon and then set her on the course to fame and fortune. She doesn't give me a tip anymore.
Keith, on that revelation, you'll be telling us next about how Greta Garbo was at your window holding on. But I'm sorry, that's Peter.
How did you hear about that?
That's Peter Cook, isn't it? Yeah, very very funny sketch about that. Greta Garbo, white knuckles. I don't know if you've ever heard it.
I haven't heard that particular sketch. But
no,
I like Peter Cook enormously. Yeah.
It's certainly worth listening to. But on that revelation, I'm going to have to go because.
Well, as usual, it's an absolute delight that you pop in, and we have some. I mean, the nice thing about these morning talks is there's a bit of nonsense, but there is a lot of meat in what we talk about, and I'm glad that you actually raised the question of Alison Rose, because I was actually going to rant about it this morning, on the basis that as I think the banks have totally and utterly lost their way. As a sector, I think that they've lost their way, and that somebody somewhere has got to rein them in. And perhaps she's going to get people to do it.
Look along the high street here. You know, there's only one bank left at the top end of the high street.
That's right.
Which is madness.
Absolutely.
As far as I can see.
In fact, there's not even a bank left at the top of the high street. There's only the one down in the precinct.
There's the Nationwide.
A building society.
Yeah,
a banking institution. I agree.
Yeah,
but I think that the remit of retail banks, particularly since we own a good chunk of some of them, they are immoral in abandoning these things. And one of the interesting things, I think I have mentioned this before, Melissa Conti, who comes on from New York and who actually works for Templeton Trust, which is a financial institution. And I asked her point blank, I said, are small town branches of banks in the United States closing? On the contrary, she said, they're opening up. Are ATMs being closed? No, she said, you can find one almost by putting your arm out. And then she said, and the other thing is that younger people are going back to using money. We are going in exactly the opposite direction. And I think that we've lost our way.
Well, it was the post offices first, wasn't it?
Right.
They went.
Yeah.
And now it's the banks. But anyway, so the post offices go, the banks go, I go. Bye.
We'll see him through the door. Okay, good to see you.
Good to see you, mate.
Say hello to the dog.
I will do. Yeah.
And have a good day in court.
I will do.
It's not a comfortable case for you, is it? At the moment, this one
doesn't matter to me.
There's a professional, you see.
And I'll give you a call if I'm free for a black horse.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, there are, as usual, a different start to the day. We'll take a brief break, and then we'll look at the newspaper headlines to see what's going on in the world, because it's all burning up. Richard Barton, there, B1 of the money, a lovely man, and certainly very thoughtful. And for somebody who's as wild in his views as me, he certainly keeps me in the straight and narrow. We've been a short period of time, just for the moment. Toodle pip.